So we've set up the grid, and like a Blue Peter moment there, I've actually got a character inside of here. Now, this is Bob. I don't think he's called Bob. I think he's an Iron Guard from... He is actually an Iron Guard from Unreal Tournament. I've used him for many years as a reference for when building, say, furniture or buildings or environments. It just helps me because he is 6 foot tall. So if I show you this, he's 182 centimeters, and if I just go, I've got to remember where this is now. Ah, there we go. Measuring tool and distance tool. And don't worry, you don't have to follow along on this. This is just me showing you for an example. If I click here and then click roughly where his head is, that was the worst click ever. He's roughly... He's about 186 centimeters now. I think 6 foot tall, so 6 foot in centimeters. He's 182, so he could probably be a little bit shorter, actually. But this is roughly the same height as the character inside of Unreal. That's why I originally put him inside of Unreal, and he measures up just snug with the character inside of Unreal. So 186 centimeters. It's fine. I'm just going to delete that tool there and just go back to here. So how I did that was I went into File, Import, and found where my scale was and imported him in. So if I delete him again, and just delete the history. File, Import. That's not Import Poly. That's one of the characters from the game. And there you go. You can see that you've got now an FBX, a model inside of Unreal, and he's all grouped up for you. Now the only problem is, I think himself, yes, his pivot's in the right place, just not the group. We'll just go like that. Okay. Can you see there how I just went center pivot and it just centered the group's pivot into the center of the mesh? Okay, so one thing as well that you'll see I'm pointing here is something called the outliner. Now the outliner is very important because what this one does is it allows us to see what's exactly in the scene. So if I was to duplicate this guy, you can see that now I have 2 Unreal Man group folders here. And if I hold shift and left click, that will open up everything inside of that group. So if I just move this out so we can show you something. So I'm holding middle mouse button and that allows me to move this out, and I can just delete that group now. So if I wanted to group, say, a selection of walls together or a selection of props together, I can do by pressing Control G. It's a bit like in Photoshop, does the same. And then I can name this Unreal Man GRP. Okay. What this does is it means that we can just navigate through this through the Maya scene quite quickly. You can imagine if there was lots more props going on, a lot more objects in scene, it'd be very hard to navigate. So it's better to keep a very clean outline, making sure that you clean up all your history. So for example, if I was to move this, actually, if I just extrude this, you can see that it's giving me some history, and if I was to delete the history, you can see that it's just deleted that extrude that we're on about. So I'm just going to press Control Z to get rid of that because we don't want a square bit like that on him. Okay, so this guy, you shouldn't edit him at all really. Just use him as a reference. But this is your outliner. There's something also as well. If we go back to Channel Box, there's something called layers. Just like in Photoshop, we can create a layer and put this guy on. So create a layer from selected. So just left click, create a layer from selected. And I'm just going to double click this to rename it and call this Unreal Ref. I can change the save. With that layer selected, I can make him transparent, but I can also make him unselectable, which is good. The only time I can select him is through the outliner. Okay. And if I wanted to hide this guy, I can do by just pressing H, and that will hide any object in the scene. And this is why the outline is important, because if you hide an object, you've got to try and find it again. So it's better to use the outliner to do that. So probably now you're all like, well, you're moving around. You haven't told us the movement tools. Okay, so I'll do that now. Alt left click allows you to rotate around the model. Okay. Alt middle mouse button clicked in. This is held. All the buttons are held, not just clicking. They're held buttons. Allows you to pan left and right, dolly, up and down. Alt right mouse. Actually, not even alt right mouse, just right mouse held. Allows you to zoom in and out. Alt middle mouse button allows you to dolly, and Alt left allows you to rotate around as well. So you can quickly start to navigate around your model. For example, if you ever zoom out like that, you can press F while you've got the object selected, and that will frame that object. Now, did you notice how when I zoomed out quite a lot that now I can't see anything? And sometimes your levels will be that big. So the easiest way to fix that is if you click the perspective button here and just go over to the attribute editor. So if you press Control A, that will bring up your attribute editor. Oh, don't do that, don't do that. Click on perspective again. You see here that's something called a far clip plane. If you add a couple of zeros to that and start to zoom out, you can see that you can get very far. Okay, so that's one way. If you start to like clip out of your object, perspective camera, far clip plane under the attribute editor, and just put a couple of zeros in and that will fix it. I'm just going to close this down. Okay. Now there's also something called snapping tools. So as you can see here, we have our gizmo. At the moment it's set to the move tool. But we also have something called snapping tools here. As you can see, we have snap to grid, snap to curves, snap to points, which is vertices, snap to projected center, and snap to view planes. Now, 1, 2, 3, you're probably never going to use in your life, but these should become your friend, especially if you're building on the grid. Now, you should always build on the grid. Okay, so now if I hold X, I can snap this object anywhere on the grid. Okay, that's me holding X down and using left click to move the object. And this is only when the move object gizmo is up, and I'll show you how to navigate through those in a minute. We also have snap to vert. Now, it's not going to do anything because we don't have any other verts inside the scene. But for example, if we wanted to change the pivot of this object, we can hold D, then hold V, and we can snap that pivot to any vertice on the model. We can also do that by holding D and X, and we can snap it to the grid as well. So if you hold D and use X and V to snap your pivot anywhere on the model. Now the reason why we always have the pivot here, because it's a lot easier when it goes into rig and everything's at the center of the world, okay, on a character. Okay. So the next protocol, I'm going to show you how to select different modes, so gizmos. So this one is the move tool. Now if anything ever happens to the move tool, you can just click reset here in the move tool settings. Okay, now I'm wondering, where has that gone? There we go. Let's go to standard. So here you'll see a host of tools. Okay, so up here we've just got the deselect selection of things. So if you press Q, you'll always get to that tool. Now here we have the move tool, which is hotkey to W, the rotate tool, which is hotkey to E, and the scale tool, which is a hotkey to R. If you ever need to change, you can double click on any of these tools here, and it will bring up the scale tool options. If you ever need to if you screw something up, you can do that by clicking reset. And that's all I'm going to talk about on this here. Sometimes this will be on relative. You probably don't want that, so you can turn that off quite easily there. Okay. So the move tool does exactly what it says. It allows you to move the object around, and I'm just going to set the pivot again back to the grid there. You see here we've started to get a selection of history. That's why I couldn't see it before, because we're on Maya Classic. And if you click history, that will delete it. If we click freeze transformations, it will freeze out these transformations, put them back to the 0, 0, 0. And this could be anywhere in the world, and you could do that. So freeze transformations. But remember, that could also hinder you as well. If you want the outliner, you can just click it here and it will click on and off. Now, there are a couple of view modes that we can use. So one of them is if we hit spacebar and then hit spacebar on the top left one, this is the top view. We have the perspective view, we have the side view, and we have the front view. Okay, and I'm hitting spacebar whenever I want to move to those. Now we can actually change these under panels, and we can start to add new cameras if we wanted to, and they'll come up in the outliner here. That's especially good if you're doing, if you're compositing shots and you want to make sure the camera, you don't move the camera around, so you can keep the original perspective camera and you create a camera that will allow you to keyframe in essence your composition. Okay, now I'm going to move on to object selection, and then hopefully in the next video we can start to look at like polygon primitives, extruding, all the different tools you're going to need to use. But for now, if you right click on the screen, you'll be able to select certain selections. So like we were talking in the last video about edges, vertexes, faces, objects. This is where you select them. So if you hold the right mouse button down, you can go anywhere and select. Okay, same with edge. So we can start to select individual edges. You can also double click on an edge, probably this one here, and it will select the edge, everything that's associated with that edge in a line, so an edge loop. Okay. And the reason why it stops here is because we've got triangles. So it doesn't like selecting triangles when it goes into a point like this. But as you can see, we've selected this here. We also have vertices, so we can select individual vertices, or we can select a selection of vertices. Now, when you're doing this, be careful that you're not selecting back vertices. And all I did there was, to get rid of my selection, was press Control, drag left mouse button hold, drag. Okay, so this is the marquee selection tool. Okay, we can do that, and then we're only moving the vertices that we've selected. So be really careful when you're doing that. Okay, try not to move like this. Okay, always move when you're in perspective in the different axes. Okay, never free move unless you're in here, for example. We can do that. Okay, it's just a good way. It's just good practice, basically. So we also have faces, so you can select faces. Okay, now one of the cool things is, what we can do is, if I hold Control, right mouse button, I can then go to face, and it'll select. So for example, if I wanted to say here and here, if I select the vertex, so right mouse button, vertex, and select these two vertices, I hold Control, right mouse button, hold, to face, it's going to select all the faces associated with those two vertices. Now this comes handy when you're selecting, when you need to select multiple faces to do edits to them, and it's very hard when the mesh is like this kind of detailed. One of the things here is this is an edge ring. So say I wanted to select all these edge rings. What I can do is select the edge, Control, to edge ring, and all I'm doing is pressing Control and then dragging the mouse to select those options. And then I could go to face, and then I get my edge ring, and then I could edit this if I wanted to. I could then pull this out. Yep. So you have to be very careful with this sort of selecting, but that's the sort of things that you can do with it. Let's see if I can select that edge, Control, edge loop, and it will select the edge loop. But if I double click on it, it will do. If I hold Shift and left click, it'll allow me to select multiple edges or multiple verts. And if I press Control, that'll allow me to deselect them. Okay. So in the next video, we're going to be covering polygon primitives, extrude, bevel, model toolkit, multi-cut tools, insert edge, append polygons, and combine. So all the tools that you're probably going to need when you're actually building your piece of furniture. So I'll see you in the next video.